Human diplomat Timothy Green stormed into the Galactic Council chamber with a face full of scars and a briefcase stuffed with horror stories that would terrorize the aliens like humanity had been terrorized for decades. Trill officials led by Mira, an alien with blue skin and yellow eyes, greeted Green with barely concealed disdain. They invited the human to the debate, probably to mock the human's primitive status. Green's scarred face remained hard and stoic. He sat at humanity's tiny table, dwarfed by hundreds of alien species, all eyes fixed on the human with fear and disgust. The harrowing meeting convened. A spindly, multi-armed creature moderating announced grim news. Unknown aliens reduced human colonies to blood-soaked craters. Billions dead. Trillions in damage. A grisly hologram depicted the carnage. Green's stomach turned. This was the 5th colony wiped out this month. Humanity would soon be extinct if the Council didn't help. Aliens bickered. Some wanted diplomacy, some suggested war. Green finally stood. His scars burned as he spoke. Humanity demands the following. We fight. And if we fight, I'll show you the meaning of true horror. I'll show you the things that stalk the darkest corners of our Deathworld. Nightmares that make this colony slaughter look like a children's cartoon. Humanity has stared monsters in the eyes and sent them whimpering like infants. Look at my scars. I got this one killing a beast that could swallow your ship's whole. This one from a creature that butchers armies. I have dozens more. Every human does. Because we don't just survive a Deathworld, we thrive in it. And if the Council doesn't grow a spine and bring the fight to these alien colony killers, humanity will show them how we tamed our Deathworld. We will become the monsters. We will haunt the stars. We will not go extinct quietly. How's that for a primitive species? Green's words rang across the chamber. Aliens murmured. Many looked ill. Green sat and pulled folders from his briefcase. It was time to teach these aliens the horrors of Earth, one story at a time. The chamber exploded in a cacophony of shouting voices, alien languages overlapping in a frantic, discordant symphony. Delegates leapt from their seats, gesticulating wildly, their faces contorted with a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. Amidst the chaos, Mira stood, her yellow eyes narrowed to slits, as she fixed Timothy with a piercing glare. "You cannot be serious," she hissed, her voice cutting through the din. "Humanity is a young, inexperienced species. What could you possibly know about fighting a threat of this magnitude?" Timothy met her gaze unflinchingly, his scarred face a mask of determination. "More than you might think," he replied, his voice low and steady. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a worn, leather-bound journal. The chamber gradually fell silent as he opened the book, the ancient pages crackling softly. Timothy began to read, his voice taking on a haunting, almost hypnotic quality. "It was the summer of 1947, he began, in a small town called Roswell, New Mexico. The inhabitants had always been a tight-knit community, but that summer something changed. People started disappearing one by one. At first they thought it was just a string of runaways, but then the bodies started turning up. The council chamber was now completely silent, the delegates hanging on Timothy's every word. He described the gruesome scenes in vivid detail, painting a picture of a town gripped by terror. The murders were unlike anything they had ever seen. Bodies drained of blood, organs removed with surgical precision, strange symbols carved into flesh. The town's sheriff, a man named Jack Holloway, was at a loss, Timothy continued. He had seen his share of violence, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't until the 4th victim that he started to piece together the truth. Timothy revealed how Jack had found strange iridescent blood at the crime scenes, blood that didn't belong to any known animal or human. He had also discovered eyewitness accounts of a strange, shifting figure lurking in the shadows. Jack realized that the killer was not human, but something far more sinister, Timothy said, his voice dropping to a whisper, a shape-shifting alien, wounded and desperate, preying on the townspeople to survive. The delegates leaned forward, their eyes wide with a mix of horror and fascination. Timothy described how Jack, armed with only his wits and a few primitive weapons, had tracked the alien to an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. He painted a picture of the final confrontation. The alien, now in its true form, a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth, lunging at Jack with inhuman speed. Jack, through a combination of quick reflexes and sheer luck, managed to dodge the creature's attacks, firing round after round into its twisting, writhing body. "In the end," Timothy said, his voice rising to a crescendo, "it was Jack's determination, his refusal to give in to fear, that saved him. With one final, desperate shot, he managed to hit the creature's vital organ, a pulsing, luminescent sac at the center of its mass. The alien let out an unearthly shriek and crumpled to the ground, its body dissolving into a pool of shimmering, iridescent ooze." As he closed the journal, Timothy looked up, his eyes meeting those of each delegate in turn. "That, my friends, is what humanity brings to the table. We have faced horrors that you cannot begin to imagine, and we have survived. We will not cower in the face of this new threat. We will fight, and we will win." For a long moment, the chamber was silent, the weight of Timothy's words hanging in the air. Then, slowly at first, a few delegates began to applaud. Within seconds, the entire chamber was filled with the sound of applause and cheers, a unified display of admiration for the human's courage and resolve. Mira, her expression unreadable, leaned in close to Timothy. "You may have won them over for now," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "But do not think this means we trust you. Humanity has a long way to go before it can truly be considered an equal member of this council." Timothy met her gaze, his eyes hard as flint. "Trust is earned, Mira," he replied, his voice unwavering, "and we intend to earn it, one battle at a time." As the council chamber emptied, Timothy gathered his briefcase, his mind still reeling from the day's revelations. Just as he turned to leave, a small, nervous-looking alien approached him. The creature had pale green skin and large, bulbous eyes that darted around the room anxiously. "Excuse me, Mr. Green," the alien said, its voice barely above a whisper. "I am Zik, a representative from a minor species on the outskirts of the galaxy. I couldn't help but overhear your story about the shape-shifting alien." Timothy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Zik glanced around as if afraid of being overheard. "My people have recently encountered a similar threat. A mysterious predatory creature has been stalking our settlements, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. We have never seen anything like it before." The alien's words sent a chill down Timothy's spine. He leaned in closer, his voice low and urgent. "Tell me more." Halake's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope flickering in their depths. "We have heard tales of humanity's experience with such horrors. Please, Mr. Green, we need your help. You may be the only one who can stop this menace before it's too late." Timothy considered the alien's plea, his mind already racing with possibilities. He had come to the council to seek aid for humanity, but perhaps this was an opportunity to prove their worth, to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "Take me to your planet. I'll investigate this creature and see what I can do to help." Zake's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Green. You have no idea how much this means to us." As they boarded Zake's small spacecraft and set off into the vast expanse of space, Timothy found himself regaling his companion with another tale from Earth's dark history. This time, he spoke of a remote research station in Antarctica, where a shape-shifting extraterrestrial parasite had infiltrated the crew. "They were cut off from the outside world," Timothy said, his voice low and ominous. "Trapped in close quarters with an enemy that could assume the form of any one of them. Paranoia and mistrust began to take hold as they slowly realized the true nature of the threat they faced." Zyke listened intently, his eyes growing wider with each twist and turn of the story. Timothy described the tense, claustrophobic atmosphere of the station's cramped corridors, as the remaining survivors desperately tried to identify and destroy the parasite before it could escape and spread to the wider world. As he reached the climax of the tale, Timothy's voice dropped to a whisper. In the end, only 2 of them made it out alive. They had to burn the station to the ground to make sure the parasite was truly dead. Zyke shuddered, a look of growing unease settling over his features. He began to realize that the threat his people faced may be far more dangerous than he had initially believed. As they approached Zyk's home planet, a sense of foreboding settled over the small spacecraft like a heavy blanket. The weight of the unknown pressed down on them, a tangible force that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. Upon landing, they were greeted by an eerie stillness. The streets of the settlement were deserted, the buildings dark and silent. It was as if the entire place had been abandoned in a hurry, its inhabitants fleeing some unseen horror. Zyk's voice trembled as he spoke. "It's never this quiet. Something's wrong." Together, the human and the alien ventured into the empty settlement, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the lifeless streets. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of dread that seemed to cling to their skin like a cold sweat. As they searched for any sign of life, a flicker of movement caught Timothy's eye. A shadow darted between two buildings, too quick to be fully seen. He motioned for Zyk to stay back, drawing his weapon with a slow, deliberate motion. His senses were on high alert, every nerve in his body tingling with anticipation. The shadow appeared again, closer this time. Timothy caught a glimpse of a grotesque, multi-limbed form scuttling along the walls, its movements jerky and unnatural. He took aim, his finger tightening on the trigger, ready to end this nightmare once and for all. But before he could fire, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, a primal cry that seemed to rip through the very fabric of reality. The unearthly scream tore through the abandoned settlement like a knife, setting Timothy's nerves on edge. Zyk's eyes widened in pure terror as he locked gazes with the human. "We have to hurry," Timothy urged, already racing towards the source of the sound. Zyk followed close behind, his heart pounding against his ribs. As they rounded the corner of a dilapidated building, the scene that greeted them was one of unimaginable horror. A group of Zyk's people lay sprawled on the ground, their bodies twisted and contorted in unnatural positions. A pool of dark, viscous liquid spread out beneath them, its surface shimmering with an oily iridescence. And standing over the fallen aliens was a creature straight out of a nightmare. Its form was a grotesque amalgamation of multiple species, with razor-sharp claws and a maw filled with jagged teeth. Its eyes glinted with a malevolent intelligence as it turned to face the newcomers. Timothy's training kicked in instantly. He raised his weapon and fired, the shots echoing through the empty streets. But the creature moved with blinding speed, dodging the blasts with unnerving agility. It lunged towards them, a snarl ripping from its throat. Zyk, frozen in terror, could only watch as the creature's powerful tail whipped out, slamming into his body with the force of a speeding truck. He felt himself flying through the air, his world spinning, before he crashed into a nearby wall. Pain exploded through his body, and darkness clouded his vision. Timothy cursed as he saw Zyk crumple to the ground. His weapon was having little effect on the creature, its shot seeming to glance off the beast's hide without causing any real damage. He needed a new plan, and fast. An idea struck him then, a desperate gambit born of necessity. He began to speak, his voice loud and clear over the sound of the creature's snarls. In a small village, deep in the heart of a dense forest on Earth, a series of bizarre and gruesome deaths began to occur, he started, his words carrying a strange weight. The creature hesitated, its movements becoming erratic and confused as Timothy continued his tale. He spoke of how the village's inhabitants discovered that the killer was a shape-shifting extraterrestrial entity, one that had taken the form of a local child to avoid detection. As he described how the villagers, armed with nothing but their wits and their faith, had managed to trap the entity and destroy it through a combination of ancient rituals and sheer force of will, the creature before him began to falter. Its form seemed to flicker and waver, as if it was struggling to maintain its coherence. Timothy pressed on, his voice rising to a crescendo as he reached the climax of his story. He painted a vivid picture of the entity's final moments, of how it had let out a piercing shriek as it collapsed in on itself, its form dissolving into nothingness. As if on cue, the creature before him let out a similar shriek, its body convulsing violently. It thrashed and writhed, its limbs flailing in all directions before it finally collapsed to the ground. Its form began to dissolve, melting away into the same dark liquid that surrounded Zik's fallen comrades. A groan from behind him caught Timothy's attention. Zik was regaining consciousness, his eyes fluttering open as he staggered to his feet. He stared at the scene before him in awe, his gaze shifting from the puddle of liquid that had once been the creature to Timothy's haunted face. "How did you know that would work?" Zik asked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and wonder. Timothy's eyes were distant as he replied, "Because I've seen it before. These creatures, they feed on fear. The more we fear them, the stronger they become. But if we can master our fear, if we can show them that we are not afraid, then we can defeat them." Zik nodded slowly, a newfound determination settling over his features. "Then that's what we'll do," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "We'll spread the word, tell the stories of how humanity has faced these horrors and emerged victorious. We'll teach the galaxy how to master its fear." Together, the human and the alien set out to gather the remaining survivors, their steps heavy with the weight of the task before them, but their hearts filled with a glimmer of hope. As the grim news of the escalating attacks spread, Timothy and Zik worked feverishly to rally the survivors and share the vital knowledge they had gained. They traveled from settlement to settlement, their voices hoarse from endless hours of impassioned speeches and urgent warnings. The survivors, their eyes haunted by the horrors they had witnessed, listened intently, clinging to every word like a lifeline in a storm-tossed sea. In the midst of their efforts, an urgent message from the Galactic Council flickered to life on their communication devices. Timothy's brow furrowed as he read the report, his eyes scanning the lines of text with growing concern. The attacks had spread, the shape-shifting entities appearing on multiple planets across the galaxy, leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. The Council, once dismissive of humanity's contributions, now turned to Timothy in desperation, their voices tinged with a mix of fear and reluctant respect. They pleaded for guidance, for a solution to the nightmare that threatened to engulf the entire galaxy. Timothy, his mind racing with possibilities, knew that time was of the essence. He paced the room, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence as he formulated a daring plan. "We need a task force," he declared, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "A group of the galaxy's bravest and most resilient warriors, each one trained in the art of facing and overcoming their deepest fears." He argued passionately, his words painting a vivid picture of the psychological warfare they would wage against the creatures. By confronting them on a mental and emotional level, by forcing them to face the very fears they fed upon, they could weaken the entities, making them vulnerable to conventional weapons. The Council, though skeptical at first, found themselves swayed by Timothy's conviction. They saw in him a strength and determination that had been lacking in their own ranks, a willingness to confront the darkness head-on, no matter the cost. With heavy hearts and a glimmer of hope, they agreed to his plan. As word of the task force spread, warriors from across the galaxy began to assemble, each one driven by a sense of duty and a burning desire to protect their homes and loved ones. They came from all walks of life, from the hardened veterans of countless battles to the young and untested, their eyes shining with a fierce resolve. Timothy, his own eyes haunted by the weight of the responsibility he had taken on, began to train them, sharing the stories and techniques that had allowed humanity to survive the horrors of its past. He spoke of the lone astronaut, stranded on a desolate alien world, stalked by a shape-shifting creature that took the form of his deepest regrets and darkest secrets. The astronaut, alone and desperate, had been forced to confront the creature, to face the demons of his past head-on. As he struggled against the entity, he came to a startling realization. The only way to defeat it was to accept his own failings, to forgive himself for the mistakes he had made, and embrace the person he had become. The task force listened intently, each member grappling with their own fears and doubts. They saw in the astronaut's story a reflection of their own struggles, a mirror held up to the darkest corners of their souls. As they trained, pushing their bodies and minds to the limit, they began to form a deep bond united by their shared purpose and their determination to protect the galaxy from the insidious threat that loomed over them all. Meanwhile, Zik worked tirelessly in his makeshift laboratory, analyzing the dark liquid left behind by the fallen creatures. He pored over the samples, his eyes straining in the dim light, searching for any clue, any weakness that could be exploited. As he studied the strange substance, he noticed a peculiar pattern. The liquid seemed to react to certain frequencies of sound, vibrating and shifting in response. Excitement surged through Zik's veins as he rushed to share his discovery with Timothy. The two huddled together, their voices low and urgent, as they began to devise a plan to use this new knowledge against the creatures. They worked late into the night, fueled by a sense of purpose and a burning desire to turn the tide of the war. But even as they made progress, a sense of unease began to grow among the task force. Strange whispers echoed in their dreams, shadows lurking at the edges of their vision. Some began to question their own sanity, their minds strained by the constant pressure of the looming threat. Timothy, sensing the growing distress among his charges, called for an emergency meeting. He gathered the task force together, his eyes scanning the sea of troubled faces before him. With a heavy heart, he began to tell another story, his voice low and somber. He spoke of a group of deep space miners, isolated on a remote asteroid, who had discovered a shape-shifting entity hiding among them. The creature had slowly driven them mad with paranoia and mistrust, turning them against each other until they were little more than shells of their former selves. As the story reached its climax, the miners, driven to the brink of insanity, had been forced to confront the creature, to trust in each other and in the strength of their own minds. Only by banding together, by relying on the bonds they had forged in the crucible of their shared nightmare, had they been able to defeat the entity and reclaim their sanity. The task force listened intently, their eyes widening as they began to see the parallels to their own situation. They realized, with a growing sense of clarity, that the only way to defeat the creatures was to trust in each other, to believe in the strength of their own minds and the unbreakable bonds of their newfound brotherhood. With renewed determination, they rose to their feet, ready to put their plan into action. They checked their weapons, their faces set with steely resolve as they prepared to face the horrors that awaited them. The weight of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, but they stood tall, united in their purpose and their unwavering belief in each other. The task force boarded their ships, a sense of grim determination settling over them as they prepared to face the horrors that awaited them on the infested planet. Timothy stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the view screen as they approached the planet's surface. The once bustling cities lay dark and lifeless before them, an eerie silence hanging over the desolate landscape. As they touched down in the heart of the largest city, Timothy led the team out onto the rubble-strewn streets. Buildings lay in ruins around them, the remnants of a desperate battle scattered at their feet. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, a palpable sense of dread clinging to their skin. Timothy's senses were on high alert as they picked their way through the devastation, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. As they walked, he began to speak, his voice low and somber. "In a world not unlike this one," he began, "a group of survivors found themselves in a similar situation. Shape-shifting alien predators had overrun their planet, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake." The team listened intently, their weapons at the ready as they moved deeper into the city. Timothy described how the survivors had discovered a weakness in the creatures, a rare metal alloy that disrupted their ability to maintain their form. "They fashioned weapons from this metal," he continued, "and used them to fight back against the invaders. It was a long and brutal battle, but in the end they emerged victorious." The task force, intrigued by this revelation, began to search the city for any signs of the mysterious alloy. They combed through the ruins, their eyes scanning every surface for a glimmer of hope. Suddenly a piercing shriek cut through the silence. The team whirled around, their weapons raised, as a horde of shape-shifting creatures emerged from the shadows. Their forms were grotesque and twisted, a nightmarish amalgamation of flesh and bone. The creatures lunged forward, their claws and teeth flashing in the dim light. The task force met them head-on, their training and newfound knowledge guiding their every move. They fought with all their strength, their weapons slicing through the air as they kept the creatures at bay. In the midst of the chaos, Raxon, a brilliant scientist and member of the team, had a sudden realization. His mind raced as he thought back to Zeke's discovery of the creature's vulnerability to sound and the rare metal alloy from Timothy's story. "If we could combine the two," he shouted over the din of battle, "we might be able to create a weapon that could permanently disrupt their shape-shifting abilities." Timothy nodded, his face grim. "Do it," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Raxon set to work, using the resources available in the abandoned city to construct a prototype device. His hands flew over the components, his mind focused on the task at hand. As the rest of the team held off the creatures, Raxon put the finishing touches on his creation. It was a sleek, pulsing weapon that emitted a high-frequency sound, its surface gleaming with the telltale sheen of the rare metal alloy. With a fierce battle cry, Raxon charged into the fray, his weapon raised high. He aimed it at the nearest creature and pulled the trigger, a pulse of energy erupting from the barrel. The creature let out an unearthly shriek, its form destabilizing and collapsing in on itself. The other creatures recoiled in pain, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. The task force watched in amazement as Raxon's weapon worked its magic, the creatures falling one by one. With renewed hope, they began to mass-produce the device, arming themselves for the final confrontation. As they prepared for the battle ahead, Timothy gathered the team around him. His eyes were haunted, his voice heavy with emotion as he began to speak. "There was a soldier back on Earth," he said, his words barely audible over the pulsing hum of their weapons. "He was a hero, a man who sacrificed everything to save his planet from a shape-shifting entity that threatened to consume it." The team listened intently, their hearts heavy with the weight of the task before them. Timothy described how the soldier, armed with nothing but a makeshift weapon and an unwavering resolve, had managed to lure the creature into a trap. "He detonated a massive explosion," Timothy continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "It obliterated them both, but his sacrifice saved countless lives." The task force, inspired by the soldier's bravery, steeled themselves for the fight to come. They knew that they might not all survive, but they were determined to protect the galaxy, no matter the cost. With a fierce battle cry, they charged into the fray, their weapons pulsing with energy. The creatures swarmed around them, their forms twisting and writhing in the shadows. The battle raged on with a ferocity that shook the very foundations of the ruined city. The task force fought with every fiber of their being, their weapons pulsing with Raxon's sonic disruptor technology as they beat back the shape-shifting horde. The creatures snarled and lunged, their grotesque forms shimmering and warping in the eerie light. As they pushed deeper into the heart of the city, a strange structure loomed before them, a towering spire that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. It seemed to be the epicenter of the creature's power, a nexus from which their malevolent influence radiated. Timothy's eyes widened as he stared up at the spire, a flicker of recognition sparking in his mind. He had seen this before, in a story from Earth's ancient past. As the task force fought on around him, he began to recount the tale, his voice low and urgent. "There was a primitive human tribe," Mamini said, his words punctuated by the sounds of battle, "that encountered a spire, just like this one, deep in the heart of a jungle. They could sense the evil emanating from it, and they knew they had to act." The team listened intently, their faces grim as they continued to fight off the shape-shifting horde. Timothy described how the tribe had sent their bravest warrior to investigate the spire, armed with nothing but a mystical talisman passed down through generations. "The warrior entered the spire," Timothy continued, "and confronted the entity within, a shape-shifting creature of immense power. They fought, and in the end, the warrior managed to seal the entity within the talisman, sacrificing his own life in the process. The task force exchanged glances, a glimmer of hope flickering in their eyes. If such a talisman existed here, it could be the key to defeating the shapeshifters once and for all. As they searched the city, a mysterious figure emerged from the shadows. A cloaked alien with piercing eyes and an aura of ancient knowledge. The alien introduced himself as Zephyr and offered to aid the team in their quest. "The talisman you seek," Zephyr said, his voice low and cryptic, "lies hidden deep beneath the city streets. I can lead you to it, but be warned, its power is not to be taken lightly." The team followed Zephyr into the depths of the city, their footsteps echoing through the abandoned tunnels. At last, they came to a hidden chamber, where a strange, glowing object rested on a pedestal, the talisman, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly energy. Zephyr cautioned that the talisman could only be wielded by one with a pure heart and an unwavering resolve. Timothy, sensing that this artifact may be their only hope, stepped forward and took the talisman in his hands. As his fingers closed around the ancient object, Timothy felt a surge of energy coursing through his body, a power both exhilarating and terrifying. He could feel the talisman's energy mingling with his own, a strange and potent force that seemed to whisper secrets from ages past. With the talisman in hand, the task force prepared for their final assault on the spire. They knew that the battle ahead would be their most challenging yet, but they were ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. As they charged forward, Timothy could feel the talisman's power growing, its energy thrumming in time with his heartbeat. He knew that he may not survive this battle, but he was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The team reached the base of the spire, the shape-shifting horde massing around them in a seething, writhing mass. With a final battle cry, they surged forward, ready to confront the evil that threatened the galaxy. The air crackled with energy as they clashed, the fate of worlds hanging in the balance. The sounds of battle raged around them as Timothy and Zephyr fought their way through the sea of writhing, shifting bodies. The creatures lashed out with claws and teeth, their forms flickering between grotesque amalgamations of flesh and bone. Timothy's sonic disruptor pulsed in his hands, the high-pitched frequency causing the creatures to recoil in pain, their bodies shimmering and destabilizing. Zephyr, his movements fluid and precise, wielded a pair of glowing energy blades, slicing through the horde with deadly efficiency. As they pushed deeper into the fray, he turned to Timothy, his eyes dark with a haunted knowledge. "There's something you need to know," he shouted over the din of battle. "Something about the true nature of these creatures." Timothy, his brow furrowed, nodded for Zephyr to continue. The aliens' words came in short, clipped bursts as they fought their way towards the base of the spire. "I am one of the last of my kind," Zephyr revealed, his voice tinged with a deep sadness. "My people, we were the ones who created the talisman long ago." He ducked beneath a slashing claw, his blade severing the creature's arm at the elbow. The shapeshifters, they weren't always like this. Once they were a peaceful race, living in harmony with the galaxy. But then, something changed. Zephyr's eyes grew distant, as if seeing back through the ages. A dark entity, a being of pure malevolence, took root within the spire. It corrupted the shapeshifters, twisting them into the monsters you see now. Timothy's eyes widened as he listened to Zephyr's tale, his mind racing with the implications. "What is this entity?" he asked, his voice strained with the effort of fighting. "We called it the Void Shifter," Zephyr replied, his tone grim. "A being of pure darkness capable of manipulating reality itself. It feeds on fear, on chaos, growing stronger with each passing moment." He fixed Timothy with a piercing stare, his next words heavy with urgency. "The talisman is the key to stopping it, but the Void Shifter, it's unlike anything you've ever faced. It will test you, push you to your limits and beyond. You must be ready to make the ultimate sacrifice." Timothy, his jaw set with grim resolve, nodded in understanding. He knew deep in his heart that he was willing to pay any price to ensure the galaxy's safety, even if that price was his own life. As they reached the base of the spire, the horde seemed to thicken, the creatures pressing in from all sides. Timothy and Zephyr fought back to back, their weapons flashing in the eerie light. They pushed forward, inch by hard-fought inch, until at last they stood before the entrance to the spire itself. The doorway yawned before them, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to swallow all light. Timothy, his hand clutching the talisman, took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. With a final nod to Zephyr, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the unknown. The chamber beyond was a nightmarish landscape of pulsating organic shapes and writhing shadows. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and a palpable sense of malevolence hung heavy in the air. At the center of the room, a towering figure stood, its form a swirling mass of darkness and chaos. The Void Shifter, sensing their presence, let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the spire. It lashed out with tendrils of pure darkness, seeking to ensnare and consume the intruders. Timothy, his mind focused and clear, stepped forward to confront the entity. He raised the talisman, the ancient artifact pulsing with a power that seemed to push back against the encroaching darkness. The Void Shifter, sensing the talisman's energy, redoubled its assault, the shadows coalescing into a storm of razor-sharp fragments that hurtled towards Timothy with blinding speed. But the human, his will unbreakable, stood firm. He began to chant the ancient words that Zephyr had taught him, the syllables rolling off his tongue with a strange, otherworldly cadence. As he spoke, the talisman began to glow, its light growing brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. The Void Shifter, its form beginning to flicker and waver under the onslaught of the talisman's power, let out a shriek of rage and pain. It surged forward, its darkness clashing against the talisman's light in a battle of pure energy. The chamber shook with the force of their struggle, the very fabric of reality straining at the seams. Timothy, his body racked with pain, poured every ounce of his strength into the talisman. He could feel the ancient artifact's power surging through him, a searing white-hot energy that threatened to consume him entirely. But he held on, his will unbreakable, his resolve unwavering. With a final desperate push, Timothy unleashed the full might of the talisman. A blinding flash of light erupted from the artifact, tearing through the Void Shifter's darkness like a blade through silk. The entity let out a final piercing scream as the light engulfed it, its form twisting and distorting as it was ripped apart by the talisman's power. And then, with a sound like the very fabric of the universe tearing, a rift opened in the heart of the chamber. A swirling vortex of pure nothingness, a yawning abyss that seemed to drink in all light and sound. The Void Shifter, caught in the inexorable pull of the rift, let out a final despairing wail as it was dragged into the depths of the pocket dimension, its darkness vanishing into the eternal void. Timothy, his strength spent, collapsed to the ground, the talisman slipping from his grasp. He lay there, his chest heaving, his vision swimming with exhaustion. He was dimly aware of Zephyr rushing to his side, the alien's hands checking for signs of life. "You did it," Zephyr whispered, his voice thick with awe and relief. "You defeated the Void Shifter." Timothy, his eyes fluttering open, managed a weak smile. "We did it," he corrected, his voice hoarse. "All of us. The task force, the galaxy. We fought this darkness together." Zephyr helped Timothy to his feet, supporting the human as they made their way back out of the spire. As they emerged into the open air, they were greeted by a sight that took their breath away. The shape-shifting horde, once a seething mass of twisted flesh and darkness, was crumbling away before their eyes. The creatures' forms dissolved into dust, their essence scattered on the wind. Without the Void Shifter's power to sustain them, they were nothing more than shadows, fleeting and insubstantial. The task force, battered and bloodied but victorious, let out a cheer that echoed across the ruined city. They had done it. The galaxy was safe, the darkness banished. But even as they celebrated, a somber realization settled over them. Their victory had come at a heavy cost. Many brave warriors had fallen in the battle against the shapeshifters, their lives given in defense of the innocent. The weight of their sacrifice hung heavy on Timothy's shoulders as he surveyed the carnage, his heart aching for the lives lost. But even in the midst of his grief, he knew that their deaths had not been in vain. They had fought for a cause greater than themselves, a battle that would be remembered for generations to come. Their courage, their selflessness, would live on in the hearts and minds of all those they had saved. As Timothy stood there, leaning heavily on Zephyr for support, he made a silent vow. He would continue to fight, to stand as a guardian against the darkness that threatened the galaxy, for he knew that the Void Shifter was not the last of its kind. There would always be new threats, new horrors lurking in the shadows, but as long as there were those willing to stand against them, to fight for the light, there was hope. And Timothy, his heart hardened by the battles he had fought and the losses he had endured, knew that he would be there ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For he was a warrior, a defender of the innocent, and he would not rest until the galaxy was safe, until the darkness was banished once and for all. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, he would fight on, a beacon of hope in a universe that often seemed so dark and unforgiving. The journey back to the Galactic Council was long and somber. Timothy sat in the ship's dimly lit cargo hold, his head bowed, his mind reeling from the horrors they had witnessed. Around him, the surviving members of the task force huddled together, their faces etched with grief and exhaustion. As they entered the council chambers, the air was thick with tension. The council members, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear, listened intently as Timothy recounted their battle against the Void Shifter. He spoke of the sacrifices made, the lives lost, his voice cracking with emotion. The council chamber fell silent as Zephyr began to speak of the Mimic, a shapeshifter capable of perfectly imitating any living being. It infiltrated worlds, sowing chaos and mistrust, he said, his eyes haunted by ancient memories. Countless civilizations fell to its machinations. The council, visibly shaken by this revelation, turned to Timothy. "You must hunt down any remaining shapeshifters," they said, their voices urgent. "Particularly this Mimic. It cannot be allowed to threaten the galaxy again." Timothy, his body still bearing the scars of his battle with the Void Shifter, nodded grimly. "We will not rest until the job is done," he vowed. As the task force set out on their new mission, a sense of unease settled over the team. Strange occurrences plagued their journey. Equipment malfunctioned, communications were disrupted, and an eerie silence seemed to follow them wherever they went. But it was the changes in the team members themselves that truly set Timothy on edge. Raxon, usually so level-headed, became prone to sudden outbursts of anger. Zephyr, normally forthcoming with his knowledge, grew secretive and withdrawn. And then there was Zik. The once timid alien had become assertive, almost aggressive, his behavior increasingly erratic. Timothy's suspicions grew with each passing day, a nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. His fears were confirmed in a moment of pure horror. They were investigating an abandoned ship, the corridors dark and lifeless, when Zik suddenly transformed before their eyes. His body twisted and contorted, his features melting and reshaping until he was no longer Zik at all, but a grotesque amalgamation of the team members he had absorbed. The Mimic, for that's what it truly was, attacked with blinding speed and ferocity. The team caught off guard struggled to fight back. Weapons fired, screams echoed through the ship's halls, and in the chaos, Timothy reached for the talisman, the one thing that could end this nightmare. But the talisman was gone, stolen by the Mimic in the midst of the fray. With no other choice, the team was forced to retreat, fleeing deeper into the bowels of the ship as the Mimic gave chase, its laughter echoing in their ears. They huddled in the darkness, nursing their wounds, their hearts pounding in the silence. Timothy, his mind racing, began to formulate a plan. He remembered Zephyr's teachings, that all shapeshifters had a weakness. They could only maintain their form for so long, before reverting to their true state. "We need to lure it into a trap," he whispered, his voice urgent. "Force it to reveal its true form." The team, desperate and with no other options, agreed. They made their way to the ship's environmental control center, where Timothy proposed filling a chamber with a toxic gas that would weaken the mimic, forcing it to revert. They set their trap and waited, the silence broken only by the pounding of their hearts. The mimic, drawn by their life signs, entered the chamber, its form shifting and twisting as it searched for its prey. As the gas filled the room, the mimic let out a scream of pain and rage. Its form dissolved, revealing a grotesque, pulsating mass of flesh and bone. The team, their weapons at the ready, opened fire, pouring every ounce of their hatred and fear into the creature's writhing form. The mimic, weakened by the gas and the onslaught of weapons fire, finally collapsed. Its body dissolved into a puddle of viscous liquid, the stolen talisman glinting in the dim light. Timothy, his breath coming in ragged gasps, retrieved the artifact. He stared at it, the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders. They had survived. But at what cost? How many more horrors lurked in the vast reaches of space, waiting to be discovered? As the team began the long journey back to the Council, Timothy couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The shapeshifters, terrifying as they were just the beginning, a mere taste of the true nightmares that awaited them in the darkness between the stars. The distress call crackled through the ship's speakers, a garbled plea for help from a nearby planet. Timothy and the remaining members of the task force exchanged uneasy glances as they listened to the static-filled message. It spoke of a new horror, a shapeshifter of unimaginable power that threatened to devour entire worlds. Without hesitation, they changed course, their ship hurtling through the void towards the source of the distress call. As they approached the planet, a sense of dread settled over the crew, a palpable weight that seemed to press down on their souls. The ship touched down on the planet's surface, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. As the ramp lowered, the team stepped out into a world of utter devastation. The once thriving cities lay in ruins, their towering structures reduced to piles of rubble. The streets were littered with the bodies of the fallen, their lifeless eyes staring up at the sky in silent accusation. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a sickly sweet odor that clung to the back of their throats. An eerie silence hung over the ruins, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the empty streets. As they picked their way through the debris, a flicker of movement caught Timothy's eye. He raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger, but as the figure stepped out from behind a crumbling wall, he relaxed his grip. It was a young alien girl, her eyes wide with fear and haunted by the horrors she had witnessed. She introduced herself as Lyra, her voice trembling as she spoke of the creature that had attacked her world, the Devourer. Lyra led the team deeper into the ruins, towards the site where she had last seen the Devourer. As they walked, she spoke of the creature's terrible power, how it could consume entire cities in a matter of hours, leaving nothing but death and destruction in its wake. At last they came to a towering structure that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The air around it seemed to shimmer and warp, as if reality itself was bending to the creature's will. As they approached the structure, a horde of shapeshifters emerged from the shadows, their forms twisted and grotesque. The team opened fire, their weapons tearing through the creature's flesh, but for every one they felled, two more seemed to take its place. They fought with everything they had, but it quickly became clear that they were outmatched. The shapeshifters pressed in from all sides, their claws and teeth tearing at the team's armor. Zephyr, his face grim with determination, pulled the talisman from his pocket. He looked to Timothy, a silent understanding passing between them. With a final nod, Zephyr raised the artifact high and unleashed its power. A massive burst of energy erupted from the talisman, a blinding light that engulfed the shapeshifters in an instant. When the light faded, the creatures were gone, reduced to piles of ash and dust. But Zephyr was gone too, his body consumed by the talisman's power. Timothy stared at the spot where his friend had stood, his heart heavy with grief and loss. There was no time to mourn, however. They had to press on to confront the Devourer before it could spread its horror to other worlds. With heavy hearts, the team entered the structure, ready to face whatever nightmares awaited them within. The interior of the structure was a labyrinth of twisting corridors and cavernous chambers, each one pulsing with the same otherworldly energy they had felt outside. The air was thick and heavy, pressing down on them like a physical weight. As they delved deeper into the structure, a sense of unease began to grow among the team. Strange whispers echoed in the darkness, half-heard snatches of conversation that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then, in a chamber at the very heart of the structure, they found the Devourer. It was a monstrous entity of pure darkness, its form constantly shifting and changing like smoke in the wind. It towered over them, a being of pure malevolence and hunger, its eyes glowing with a sickly, otherworldly light. The creature turned its gaze upon Timothy, and he felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure on his mind. Images flashed through his thoughts, visions of his deepest fears and darkest secrets laid bare before the Devourer's probing consciousness. He saw himself failing, watching helplessly as the galaxy burned. He saw the faces of those he had lost, their eyes accusatory in death, and he saw the truth of his own soul, the darkness that lurked within, waiting to be unleashed. Timothy fought against the visions, his mind straining under the onslaught. He clung to the talisman, drawing upon its power to push back against the Devourer's darkness. But the creature was strong, its will like a physical force pressing down upon him. Timothy could feel himself slipping, his grip on reality starting to fray at the edges. In a final desperate act, he unleashed the full power of the talisman. The artifact flared with a blinding light, a searing white-hot energy that tore through the Devourer's essence like a blade. The creature let out a scream of agony and rage, its form flickering and distorting as the talisman's power ripped it apart. With a final, shuddering gasp, the Devourer collapsed in on itself, its darkness dissipating like mist in the sun. But the victory had come at a great cost. As the light of the talisman faded, Timothy looked down to see the artifact crumbling to dust in his hands, its power spent. And he could feel something inside himself crumbling as well, his mind fracturing under the weight of the horrors he had witnessed. He slumped to the ground, his eyes staring blankly into the darkness. The surviving members of the task force gathered around him, their faces etched with sorrow and grief. They had won, but at what cost? They returned to the Galactic Council, bearing the broken shell of the man who had saved them all. The Council honored Timothy and the fallen heroes of the task force, their sacrifices forever etched into the annals of history. But even as they celebrated their victory, a sense of unease hung over the proceedings. They had defeated the shapeshifters, but at the cost of their most powerful weapon and their greatest champion. And in the depths of space, whispers began to circulate of new horrors stirring in the darkness, ancient evils awakening from their slumber. The galaxy had been saved, but for how long? The scars on Timothy's soul, like the scars on the fabric of reality itself, would never truly heal. And somewhere out there, in the vast uncharted reaches of the void, new nightmares were waiting to be born, ready to plunge the galaxy into a darkness from which there may be no escape. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.